All right, hi everyone. This is the second lecture I'm going to do on pre-Roman history and culture. And just to orient yourselves here, this is a partial map of Italy. You've got Rome down here. Um, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the Etruscans, which their major cities are here. And then as you can see from the index on the slide, they start to expand northwards and southwards. We're also going to talk a little bit about the Greeks. And this is an interesting time point for the Greeks as well, because starting, it really depends on the city-state you're talking about in Greece, but they start expanding out from where they started in Greece and spread all throughout the Mediterranean. And a number of sites, Greek sites, are found in Italy, both on the mainland and on Sicily. It's pretty interesting, especially, and I will definitely talk about this if you end up taking my ancient Greece course. But there's a lot of reasons for colonization by the Greek, and I just put here resources where um, starting around 800 BC, you get something called the Dark Age in Greece. It's not kind of, it's not exactly a total dark age, but anyway, you've got some collapse happening there, and it forces a lot of people to leave Greece. Status as well. If you weren't high status in Greece, the only way you could get it is to leave. And so a lot of people left during this period and found their way to Italy. Okay, let's talk about the Etruscans. I'm really excited about them. Um, what's happening right now, which is August 2026, is this amazing exhibition at the Legion of Honor on the Etruscans. And if you get a chance to go, I hope you do. And they have a pretty amazing book. I should have had this ready. Um, you probably can't see it because the background's being blurred, but it's called The Etruscans from the Heart of Ancient Italy. Fantastic exhibit, by the way, in case you get a chance to go before it disappears. But anyway, the Etruscans were in northern part of Italy. They were probably being organized a little bit before this period, but we'll say between 9 and 800 BC. They are a settled culture. And I had mentioned in the previous lecture that they were probably part of the Villanovan culture, which is an early group of people living in northern Italy, and then the Etruscans probably come from them. This area in northern Italy was very wealthy in terms of natural resources. So they had lots of metals, and they became very famous as metal workers. And again, if you saw the exhibit, or if you get to see the exhibit, you see some amazing metalworking with gold and copper and iron. It's just really incredible. These Etruscans were very influential on the Romans, and we'll talk about this in a bit. Um, During this period, Rome was just a series of little villages here and there, so nothing like the Etruscans during this time. Now, the Etruscans, the way that they set up their culture, they were independent city-states. And a city-state just means you've got a ruler of a city and the surrounding area, and then maybe the next city northwards has another king or a ruler, and they control the city and the land and so on. Um, every once in a while, they do get together, especially for military reasons. But this was kind of their downfall. We'll talk about this. We talk about the Romans taking the Etruscans over, is that these independent city-states weren't um, like a country. I mean, it's hard to call anybody a country during this period, but they were unable to resist Rome because Rome was much bigger, more organized, and these independent city-states fell, sometimes rather quickly, sometimes it took a while. They were agrarian, like lots of cultures during this period, meaning they were dependent on agriculture. They did have a strong military, despite what I just said. And if you remember the map I just showed you, they ended up spreading north and south of their area. They had these amazing trade routes as well. So there were Greek colonies in Italy, in the southern part of Italy, and in Sicily. They were trading with Phoenicia, which I had mentioned in a previous lecture. That's where modern day Israel Palestine is. They were trading with the Carthaginians in North Africa. So big trade networks, and in Greece, in the mainland Greece, they were very well connected with the civilizations that were popular during this period. So I mentioned they were amazing metal workers. You see some incredible bronze statues, gold jewelry, and so on. And I just mentioned the trade routes, and that's really important to remember when you're thinking about both society and their economy, how they were doing everything and how they were surviving. Um, these were not something called an Indo-European people. So Indo-Europeans are coming from, like, really the Indo is India, but it's really Central Asia and Europe. And then these Indo-European people started a lot of different cultures, and they have very similar languages. Like, for example, the word mother, matre. There's lots of different variations of that. Father, patre. That's kind of coming from an Indo-European language, but the Etruscans have a different language. They were not Indo-European people. I already mentioned that their cities were built all over northwestern Italy. They were highly advanced when, like 600, 500 BC, with walled cities, very advanced people. And what's really interesting, so I just mentioned all the trade routes they have. One result of that is that they can either impact a culture or they can be impacted by a culture. And we know from a lot of the archaeology that survives is that they were definitely influenced by the Greeks. So they used a version of the Greek alphabet. They probably learned a lot about sculpture and painting from the Greeks, especially the Greek colonies that were in Italy at this time. The building of large temples, I'll show you a few Greek temples that were in existence in Italy during the same period. And in terms of the city style, the planning, the development, they probably picked up these ideas from the Greeks. One thing that the Etruscans did, and I can't remember if I mentioned this already, but they cremated their dead. And in fact, I did. In the previous lecture, I showed you a Villanovan burial, which is called a well burial, where they dig a hole and then they put an urn with a top on it. This is an Etruscan hut urn, and it's called a hut because you can clearly see it looks like a house. And then they put this lid on top, and this particular one looks like probably what one of their village houses look like during this particular period. And then they would bury these. So they would cremate the body, put the ashes in, and then bury them. And the door of this one, or if you want to call it the door, is removed. You can see part of it sitting here. The Etruscans are known for not only their metalwork, but their incredible artwork. And we know this mostly because of their tombs. So quite a few of their tombs survive, and when they're opened up, they're usually painted floor to ceiling with different scenes. And what you're looking at here is something called the Tomb of the Diver. And these are various scenes, not in the order they're found in the tomb, but as you can see from the citation here, this particular person put these 5 panels together. But it's called the Tomb of the Diver for obvious reasons. You can see someone diving off a platform into the water. And then you can see various other scenes, like these are probably people eating on these couches. And you can see sort of the same scene over here. And this is really interesting, this one here. You got this person walking, but what's really interesting is this vase. And if you've ever been to a museum, you see a lot of Greek style vases. One of the reasons for that is that people were buried with these. And then when the tombs are dug up, you have a great example of an untouched piece of pottery from that particular period. Okay, I've got a lot of material on here, and I put all of this down here because I wanted to kind of impress upon you that the Etruscans had a big impact on the Romans. So when the Romans finally started building large temples, they did it in the type of the Etruscans, who learned it from the Greeks. So you've got the Greek influence on the Etruscans and the Etruscan influence on the Romans. We'll also see a direct um, connection between the Romans and the Greeks as well. You've got these houses called the atrium, and I haven't talked about this yet, but if you imagine a sort of rectangular house where you've got the door here, you would look in and you'd have an open spot here. And this would sometimes be open to the elements. There'd be a little well here so that when it rains, the water would go down into a subterranean well. And then you would have rooms off to the side. And so this is a typical atrium house from the Roman period, which the Etruscans had the same. And the idea is that someone could walk by on the sidewalk, look in and look deep into the atrium where you could show off your wealth and so on. We also have sculptures, Roman sculptures being influenced by the Etruscans. The toga itself, which we always kind of consider to be Roman, that was taken from the Etruscans, and so on. So you've got religious ceremonies, and the Roman numerals are actually coming from the Etruscans and from the Greeks and so on. So lots of impacts on the Romans. Okay, now I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Greeks and their influence on the Romans. So what you're looking at here is a map showing Greek colonization between 750 and 500 BC. And this is mainland Greece here. And so I was just mentioning during the Dark Age, it was about 800 BC, Greece was having a very hard time, and lots of people started leaving Greece. What's interesting about Greek colonization is when they went, say, here's a map of Italy, you've got Poisidina right here. This colonization, when the Greeks left Greece, they didn't forget their culture. In fact, they brought their almost entire culture there. So building style, government style, religious style, they brought that with them. So when you look at any of these Greek colonies, they're built in the same way as the Greek city-states in Greece. But anyway, so you've got this map of Italy, and you can see quite a few Greek colonies. This is the island of Sicily, kind of at the boot of Italy. It's packed full of Greek colonies. And as you can see, well, actually, you can't see Rome. It's about right here. Very close proximity to these Greek city-states. There was quite a bit of influence on them. Now, this is an example of a fully formed Temple of Hera. Now, the Greeks just didn't land in Italy and instantly build these massive temples. Sometimes they were very close to doing that, but it took a little while to set up the colony and then to build these things. But this is a temple of Hera in Agrigento, which is in Sicily. I do want to talk a little bit about Posidonia, which, as you can see, is right here. And just to place yourself here, this Pompeii is here, and Neapolis is here, and that is Naples. And then Rome would be further up on this particular map, but very close to the Romans. And this is a Temple of Hera. It's sometimes called the Temple of Hera II. And it was built between 470 and 460 BC. And it's a massive temple. You can see it's 180 feet by 74 feet. Now, in 470 to 460 BC, Rome was just into its Republican era, and it was just getting organized. So they weren't building temples like this just yet. But they took this as a framework. And again, so did the Etruscans. So you've got lots of kind of influence going back and forth. And then in terms of impacts of Greece on Rome, as I put up here, just remember that some of these are also through the Etruscan influences. Sometimes it's hard to tell exactly which culture impacted Rome the most, but you've got writing. So the Greeks had an alphabet that the Etruscans ended up borrowing and using, and then the Romans ended up borrowing and using as well. Architecture, so even though you can't quite tell, but when you look at those Greek temples that I just showed you, a lot of the Roman temples look very similar, and that's part of the influence of Greece and the Etruscans on Rome. Religion too, so I'm sure quite a few of you heard that Rome has a pantheon of gods or a series of gods and goddesses that were borrowed from Greece, and that is certainly true, but you don't want to think about them as kind of like wholesale, no change borrowing. So the Romans certainly borrowed wide aspects of Greek religion, but it's not exactly the same. And later, especially when Rome takes over Greece, which we will talk about probably in 8 or 9 weeks, we will see that even though Rome captures Greece and takes it over, Greece really had kind of this reverse situation in Rome where Greek culture is wholesale adopted by the Romans, especially art. They have a big influence on Roman art, Roman literature, especially when the Romans start to write, especially history in particular, and Roman science was highly influenced by the Greek. So it's a very interesting thing to think about all the different cultures that existed in Italy and how they impacted each other. And then that was the last slide. So next week, what we're going to look at is the earliest history of Rome. And I've put a question mark here because as we will talk about, a lot of the earliest history of Rome is not written down during that period. We have, material written 500, 600 years after the fact, and there's a lot of mythology that the Romans used, which might tell us a little bit about the real history of Rome. Anyway, we will save that for next week.